My fiancée told me she wanted to be child-free and I supported her. But then I noticed she was taking prenatal pills and texting another man about not loving me and wanting his baby because of superior genetics. When we met, she said she didn't want a father with my genes, so I avoided drama and simply told her mom and dad everything, and now they're shameless. Hey Reddit, my name is Derek, and I'm 28 years old. I've been living in Miami for the past few years, working as a quality assurance specialist for a tech company. Overall, life has been treating me pretty well. I have a good job, a decent apartment, and what I thought was a solid relationship. I've been with my girlfriend Jessica for almost 2 years now. Our entire relationship was built on a foundation that we both considered unshakable. We were aggressively child-free. This wasn't just a casual preference. It was practically a core belief system for both of us. Jessica used to go on these passionate, almost angry rants about how kids completely ruined people's lives. She would talk about how she'd never be one of those women who threw away their careers for diapers and sleepless nights. Her speeches about maintaining independence were intense and convincing, delivered with the kind of conviction that made me believe this was truly who she was. But people change, right? Maybe she'd had a genuine change of heart. Maybe we'd grown closer over our time together, and she felt ready for that next step in life. At least, that's what I tried to tell myself when everything started unfolding. Picture this scenario. It's 7:23 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. I know the exact time because I was staring at my phone, probably checking emails or social media, when Jessica walked out of our bathroom. She was holding something in her hand, not just any pregnancy test, but one of those expensive digital ones that literally spells out pregnant in bold letters, leaving absolutely no room for interpretation or confusion. She was crying, but they seemed like happy tears, or at least that's what I assumed in that moment. Her voice was shaking when she said, "Derek, oh my God, we're having a baby." The words hung in the air between us like they were written in neon lights. So I did what any decent boyfriend would do in that situation. I hugged her tightly, told her we'd figure everything out together, and asked how she was feeling about all of this. What I should have done was pay closer attention to how calculated her reaction seemed. I should have noticed how she kept glancing at my face, clearly gauging my response and adjusting her own behavior accordingly. I should have found it strange how she immediately started talking about timing, doctor's appointments, and making sure we did everything right, as if she'd already been planning this conversation in her head. The first weird thing happened about an hour later. I was in the kitchen making coffee, still processing everything that had just happened, when I mentioned that I should probably call out of work so I could go with her to confirm everything with a doctor. The moment those words left my mouth, Jessica got this panicked look on her face. Not the kind of nervous excitement you'd expect from someone who just found out they're pregnant, but genuine panic. She quickly said no, that she'd handle it herself. When I asked why she didn't want me there, she explained that she wanted to process everything on her own before involving me in the medical stuff. She said she needed time to wrap her head around it all before bringing me into doctor's appointments and all the clinical aspects of pregnancy. This was red flag number 1. What kind of partner doesn't want their significant other at the first pregnancy appointment? This is supposed to be one of the most important moments in a couple's life together. But honestly, I let it slide because I was still in complete shock myself. We'd been careful about protection. Not perfect, but careful. Sometimes these things just happen despite your best efforts, right? The second red flag came that same evening. Jessica was on her laptop, which wasn't unusual since she often worked on freelance graphic design projects at home. But I noticed she kept angling the screen away from me whenever I walked past or came near her. When I walked behind her to get something from the kitchen, she minimized whatever she was looking at with lightning speed, like she was hiding something important. When I casually asked what she was working on, she said it was just pregnancy stuff. Research, forums, articles about what to expect. That seemed reasonable enough. A new pregnancy means lots to learn, and Jessica was always thorough about researching anything important in her life. But then I noticed her phone lying face down on the counter, and it was buzzing constantly. I'm talking every few minutes, like someone was having an urgent conversation with her via text. When I mentioned how active her phone was being, she said it was probably her mom, who had been texting nonstop since Jessica told her the news. Here's the thing, though. Jessica had specifically told me earlier that day that she wasn't planning to tell her parents about the pregnancy until after the first doctor visit. She wanted to make sure everything was progressing normally before getting families involved and dealing with all the excitement and questions that would inevitably follow. That's when the little voice in my head started whispering that something was off. Not necessarily wrong, but definitely off. I wish I'd listened to that voice sooner, but then again, I'm actually glad I didn't. Because if I'd confronted her right then and there, I never would have discovered the full scope of what she was planning. And I definitely wouldn't have been able to orchestrate the beautiful, karma-filled destruction that eventually followed. See, I work in quality assurance for tech companies, which means I spend my days investigating software bugs and system failures. My job is essentially to look for inconsistencies, follow code trails, and document problems that people create when they think nobody's watching. This line of work has made me naturally suspicious, but it's also taught me to be methodical and patient when investigating potential issues. So instead of confronting Jessica about her weird behavior, I decided to do what I do best: investigate. That decision ended up changing everything. When your gut tells you something's fundamentally wrong, and you happen to have the professional skills to find out exactly what that something is, you use those skills. It's just logical. Thursday morning, after Jessica left for her graphic design job, I took a closer look around our apartment. We'd been living together for about 9 months at this point. She'd moved in when her lease expired, primarily for financial convenience, splitting rent, sharing utilities, all the practical stuff that makes cohabitation appealing. Nothing seemed obviously out of place at first glance, but I started noticing things I'd previously overlooked. Jessica had been getting mail from places I didn't recognize, and she had a habit of grabbing these pieces of mail before I could see the return addresses. I'd chalked it up to online shopping or maybe new accounts she'd opened, but now it felt potentially significant. I also realized something that should have been obvious much sooner. I couldn't remember the last time we'd been intimate. I really couldn't remember. I had to think back through weeks and weeks, and I was pretty sure it had been at least 7 weeks, maybe even longer than that. For a couple supposedly surprised by an unplanned pregnancy, that timeline was extremely interesting and didn't add up at all. Friday, I decided it was time for some light digital reconnaissance. My quality assurance training was practically screaming that the story Jessica had told me didn't add up when you looked at all the available data points. Fortunately, Jessica uses the same password for everything: her childhood cat's name plus her birth year. She'd told me this combination months ago when she asked me to grab something from her laptop while she was rushing to get ready for work. When she left her laptop open after hurrying out the door that morning, I took a careful look at her browsing history. The pregnancy websites made perfect sense for someone who just discovered they were expecting. But there were also some searches that seemed odd for someone supposedly surprised by her pregnancy. How to tell if pregnancy test is accurate, false positive pregnancy tests, and how long after conception do tests show positive. These were weird searches for someone who claimed to be caught off guard by an unexpected pregnancy. They suggested someone who was actively questioning the accuracy or timing of their test results, which didn't match Jessica's story at all. The really interesting stuff, though, was in her email. I found 4 weeks' worth of correspondence with someone named Nathan Rodriguez. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't immediately place it. The emails were about meeting up and discussing their situation and making sure everything was handled properly. The tone was intimate and conspiratorial, like they were planning something together. Then I saw an email from 3 weeks ago that made my blood run completely cold. It said, "Jess, talk to my lawyer friend like you asked. If you're both listed as possible fathers on the birth certificate, it gets complicated. But the guy who signs first and acts as the father has the stronger legal position, especially if there's been financial support during pregnancy. Just something to keep in mind for timing purposes. And possible fathers, plural." The email was discussing legal strategies for a situation involving multiple potential fathers. That's when I remembered who Nathan Rodriguez was. Jessica had mentioned him before as an ex from college, someone she'd supposedly dodged a bullet with. According to her, he was too controlling and possessive, which was why their relationship had ended badly. So why was her allegedly terrible ex-boyfriend giving her legal advice about paternity issues? The pieces weren't adding up, and I needed more information. I kept digging through her digital footprint. Nathan wasn't just some random ex from her past. He was married. According to his social media profiles, he'd been married for 3 years to a woman named Victoria, who worked as a flight attendant. Victoria's Instagram account painted the picture of a perfect life, constantly posting about their relationship milestones, their house, their travels together. But Victoria's job was particularly interesting. As a flight attendant, she was required to travel constantly, and her social media showed she'd been out of town 4 days a week for the past 3 months. She was always posting photos from different cities, showing off her work life and the places she visited. When I cross-referenced those travel dates with Jessica's recent schedule, the pattern became unmistakably clear. Every single time Victoria was out of town for work, Jessica had been mysteriously busy. She'd claim she was working late at the design agency, or that she had weekend shopping trips planned, or that she was visiting friends I'd never met. But now, I could see the real pattern. Jessica's busy periods perfectly aligned with Nathan's wife being out of town. I felt physically sick when the full picture came together. It was that deep, bone-deep nausea you get when you realize someone you trusted has been systematically lying to your face for months. But alongside the nausea, I also felt a cold, calculating anger. The same kind of focused rage I experience when I'm debugging critical system failures and all the pieces suddenly click into place. Jessica wasn't just cheating on me. She was pregnant with another man's baby and was actively planning to pass it off as mine. The legal research, the timing concerns, the careful management of my reactions, it was all part of an elaborate con game. She was treating our relationship and my future like variables in some twisted equation she was trying to solve. But here's the thing about con games. They only work when the mark doesn't know they're being played. And now I knew exactly what game Jessica was playing. I had to make a choice at that point. I could confront Jessica immediately with what I'd discovered, or I could keep digging to see how deep this deception really went. The smart play, the quality assurance specialist play, was to gather more evidence before revealing my hand. In system failure cases, you never tip your hand early. The best solutions happen when you have comprehensive documentation that makes the problem impossible to ignore or deny. So I decided to keep building my case against Jessica. I wanted to understand not just what she was doing, but exactly how she planned to do it and what her endgame really was. I set up a basic surveillance system to track Jessica's movements and behavior patterns. When she said she was going somewhere, I'd note the time, location, and stated purpose of her trip. When she returned, I'd document her mood, appearance, and any behavioral changes I observed. I started taking screenshots of everything that seemed suspicious: emails, text message notifications, story inconsistencies, anything that didn't align with her supposed narrative. I created a dedicated folder on my work laptop called Personal J Situation, where I stored all this documentation. What I discovered through this systematic approach was significantly worse than I'd initially thought. This wasn't just a passionate affair that had gotten out of hand. This was calculated, methodical planning to use me as a backup option while she tried to lock down her first choice. The timeline I reconstructed showed that Jessica had reconnected with Nathan about 5 months ago. It started with social media flirting that gradually escalated as they discovered his wife's predictable travel schedule. Victoria's job gave them regular opportunities to meet up without risk of being caught. But Nathan wasn't willing to leave his wife for Jessica. He wanted to maintain his comfortable married life while enjoying the excitement of an affair on the side. Jessica was getting impatient with this arrangement. She'd moved in with me primarily for financial convenience, but she clearly saw Nathan as the bigger prize, the better long-term investment. The pregnancy was her attempt to force Nathan's hand and make him choose between his wife and her. But here's where it gets really calculated. Jessica had been tracking her menstrual cycle and deliberately timing our intimate moments to make me a viable candidate for fatherhood, while also maximizing her chances of conception during her meetings with Nathan. She was essentially hedge-betting her pregnancy, ensuring that regardless of who the biological father was, she'd have options. Her plan was diabolical in its simplicity. Tell both Nathan and me that we might be the father, then use the legal system to her advantage. If Nathan stepped up and finally left his wife for her, she'd go with him and eventually reveal the truth to me. If Nathan refused to leave Victoria, Jessica would stick with me and let me raise Nathan's child while she continued trying to win Nathan back. She'd never intended to give up on Nathan. I was just meant to be the reliable safety net who'd provide financial support and stability while she pursued what she really wanted. Looking at all this evidence, I realized something disturbing. I was never actually a boyfriend to Jessica. I was a financial safety net with a functioning reproductive system. She'd calculated that I was dependable enough to raise a child and support a family, but not exciting enough to be her first choice. I was the backup plan she'd keep around in case her real target didn't work out. Jessica wanted to play games with people's lives and manipulate major life decisions for her own benefit. She was about to learn that some people are much better at playing games than others. By the following Tuesday, I had assembled everything I needed to confront Jessica about both the affair and the pregnancy situation. but I wasn't ready to play that card yet. Catching her in the lie was only the beginning of what I had planned. She could admit to everything, apologize profusely, pack up her stuff and move out, and basically get away with attempting one of the most manipulative betrayals I could imagine. That outcome wasn't nearly enough for me. I wanted Jessica to face real consequences for what she'd planned to do. The kind of consequences that would make her think twice before trying this kind of manipulation with someone else in the future. So I decided to start with a subtle probe, something that would reveal more about her plan without letting her know I was onto her scheme. I wanted to see how she'd react when I started asking the kinds of questions that would matter if I was actually planning to be this baby's father. Saturday night we were having dinner together. Just takeout Thai food, nothing fancy. And I brought up the pregnancy in what I hoped sounded like a casual way. "So I've been thinking about the baby situation," I said, watching her face carefully for any tells. "We should probably start talking about practical stuff, like how we want to handle the birth certificate, insurance, that kind of thing." She got very still, like a deer that suddenly senses danger. "What do you mean about the birth certificate?" she asked. "Well, I assume you'll want my name on it as the father, right? But I was reading that there's actually a bunch of legal stuff involved. Like apparently you have to be married for the father's name to automatically go on there. Otherwise there's paternity paperwork and waiting periods and stuff." I should mention that this was mostly bullshit. I'd done some basic research, but I was deliberately muddying the waters to see how she'd react to the suggestion that legal documentation might be complicated. "Oh," she said, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head. "I hadn't really thought about that." "Yeah, it's more complicated than I expected, actually. I was thinking maybe we should talk to a lawyer just to make sure we do everything right. My company has a legal department that handles family law stuff." The panic in her eyes was immediate and unmistakable. "That seems like overkill for something so straightforward," she said quickly. "I don't know, Jess. This stuff really matters. Like, what if something happened to me? I'd want to make sure you and the baby were protected legally. And apparently, if the paperwork isn't done right, it can cause all sorts of problems down the road." I let that statement hang in the air while she processed the implications. If we involved lawyers, they'd start asking detailed questions about timeline, about paternity, about all the stuff she was trying to keep deliberately vague and unexamined. "Maybe we should wait until after the first doctor's appointment," she said finally. "You know, make sure everything is progressing normally before we get lawyers involved." "When is that appointment again? I know you said you wanted to handle the first one yourself, but I'd really like to be there for the important stuff." Another flash of panic crossed her face. Tuesday, but it's just a basic confirmation thing. Blood work, dating the pregnancy, boring medical stuff. You don't need to take time off work for that." This was interesting. Dating the pregnancy was exactly what she wouldn't want me to witness, since it would reveal whether the timing matched up with our last intimate encounter or not. "Well, what about the next one then? I definitely want to be involved in this process." "Of course, absolutely. I'll let you know as soon as I schedule it." The rest of dinner was awkward as hell. Jessica kept trying to steer the conversation towards safer topics, and I kept bringing it back to pregnancy logistics and planning. By the end of the meal, she was clearly frustrated and suspicious about why I was suddenly so interested in the legal and medical details. That night, she was on her phone until almost 3 a.m. I could hear her having lots of urgent, hushed conversations in the bathroom, presumably with Nathan about how to handle my sudden interest in documentation and timelines. The next morning, she announced that she was going to spend the weekend at her sister's place to process everything and think about the future. Perfect. That gave me 3 days to execute phase 2 of my plan. While I'd been gathering evidence about Jessica's deception, I'd also been doing extensive research on Nathan and Victoria Rodriguez. What I discovered was something very interesting about their relationship dynamic that made Nathan's behavior even more disgusting than I'd initially realized. Victoria wasn't just traveling for work on some random schedule. She was actively trying to get a major promotion that required her to take on additional routes and prove she could handle extended travel schedules. This was a big deal for her career advancement, and according to her social media posts, Nathan had been incredibly supportive of her professional goals. He was constantly posting about how proud he was of her dedication and work ethic. In other words, Nathan had been actively encouraging his wife to travel more so he could cheat on her more easily. While Victoria was working her ass off to advance her career and build their future together, her husband was using her absence as an opportunity to plan a family with his ex-girlfriend. The level of betrayal was staggering. I figured Victoria deserved to know what was really happening, But I also knew that if I contacted her directly, it might tip off Nathan. Nathan would then warn Jessica, and Jessica would disappear before I could implement the full scope of my revenge plan. I needed to be subtle about approaching Victoria. I created a fake Facebook account with a generic name, stock photo, and minimal personal information. Then I sent Victoria a friend request along with a carefully crafted message. Hi, Victoria. I think we have some mutual friends from college. I came across some information that you might want to know about, but I wasn't sure how to reach you. Would you be open to a phone conversation sometime? It's regarding someone we both know. Chris. The message was vague enough to be intriguing, but specific enough to suggest legitimacy. I didn't want to come across as some random internet creep, but I also couldn't be too specific about what I knew without revealing my identity. She accepted the friend request within a few hours and messaged back asking for more details. I told her it was complicated and sensitive, but that I'd rather explain everything over the phone if she was comfortable with that approach. I wanted to seem respectful of her privacy while also conveying the seriousness of the situation. By Monday evening, I had Victoria's phone number and a detailed plan for a conversation that would completely blow up Nathan's life while keeping my involvement hidden. The dominoes were starting to line up perfectly. Tuesday morning, Jessica left for her supposed doctor's appointment, looking nervous as hell. Before she walked out the door, she gave me this long, lingering hug and said, "Thank you for being so understanding about everything. I know this is all happening fast. If only she knew how fast things were actually about to happen. I waited until I was absolutely certain she was gone, then made the call that would change everything. Hi, Victoria, this is Chris. Thanks for agreeing to talk with me. Of course, I have to admit I'm curious about what this is regarding." I took a deep breath. This conversation had to be absolutely perfect, convincing enough to get her attention, but not so specific that she could trace it back to me later. This is really difficult to say, but I have reason to believe your husband Nathan might be having an affair. There was silence on the other end for about 15 seconds, which felt like an eternity. Finally, Victoria responded, "I'm sorry, who is this again? How do you know my husband?" "We have mutual acquaintances from college. I came across some information accidentally, and I debated whether to reach out. But I felt like if I was in your position, I'd want to know." "What kind of information?" "Text messages, photos, evidence of them meeting up when you're out of town for work." Another long pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end, processing what I was telling her. "Can you be more specific about these mutual acquaintances? I'm having trouble understanding how you'd have access to my husband's private messages." Shit. She was smarter than I'd hoped, and she was asking exactly the kind of questions I'd been worried about. I needed to redirect this conversation quickly before she became too suspicious to listen. "Look, Victoria, I understand your skepticism. I would be suspicious too if I were in your shoes. But let me ask you this. Has Nathan been acting differently lately? More secretive about his phone? More interested in your travel schedule? Less available when you're actually in town?" I heard her breath catch slightly. "How would you know that?" "Because that's what cheaters do. They create opportunities. Your job requires you to travel, which gives him perfect cover for an affair. I'm betting he's been very supportive of your career lately, right? Encouraging you to take on more routes, telling you how proud he is of your dedication?" "Stop!" Her voice was sharp now. "I don't know who you are or why you're calling me, but this conversation is over. Victoria, wait. Check his phone tonight when he thinks you're asleep. Check his messages, look for deleted conversations, look for apps he doesn't usually use. I'm not asking you to take my word for anything. I'm asking you to verify what I'm telling you." She hung up. I sat there for a minute, wondering if I'd overplayed my hand. But then I realized it didn't actually matter whether she believed me immediately or not. I'd planted the seed of doubt in her mind. Victoria was going to be watching Nathan more carefully now, and Nathan was going to slip up eventually. Cheaters always do when they know someone's suspicious. Around noon, Jessica texted me. "Everything looks good. Due date is early November. Can't wait to tell you all about it tonight." Early November. I did the math quickly in my head. That would put conception around mid-February or early March, right around the time Jessica had started being too tired for intimacy, but had been having all those mysterious weekend plans. The timeline confirmed exactly what I already suspected. This definitely wasn't my baby. I spent the rest of the day putting together my final evidence package. Screenshots of emails, documented timeline inconsistencies, research on pregnancy dating, detailed notes about Jessica's behavior changes. Everything organized and annotated like a proper case file, the way I'd learned to document system failures at work. That evening, Jessica came home with takeout from my favorite restaurant and a bottle of sparkling apple cider to celebrate our news properly. "So tell me about the appointment," I said as we sat down to eat. "Everything's perfect. Baby's measuring right on track, heartbeat sounds strong. The doctor said I'm about 9 weeks along. 9 weeks would put conception in late January. We definitely hadn't been intimate in late January. I was certain of that." "That's great, babe. Did they give you any paperwork? Ultrasound pictures or anything?" "Oh, not yet. Too early for ultrasounds. Just blood work and basic measurements." This was a lie. 9 weeks is exactly when they usually do the first ultrasound to confirm viability and dating. "When's the next appointment?" 3 weeks. That's when we'll do the ultrasound and hear the heartbeat and all that exciting stuff." "Perfect. I'll definitely want to be there for that." Her smile looked forced. "Of course." We spent the evening making small talk about baby names and nursery ideas, but I could tell she was distracted. Her phone kept buzzing and she kept checking it nervously. Around 11 p.m., she got a call that made her face go completely white. "I need to take this," she said, walking into the bedroom and closing the door firmly behind her. I couldn't hear the conversation clearly, but I caught fragments through the door. "Told you this would happen. Need to be more careful. And can't keep doing this." When she came back out, she looked shaken. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, just work drama. One of our clients is being difficult." Another lie. Jessica worked in graphic design for a small agency that handled local businesses. Nothing they dealt with was urgent enough to warrant an 11 p.m. panic call. The next few days followed the same pattern. Jessica would go to work, come home acting normal, then spend the evening on urgent phone calls and text conversations that she wouldn't explain. Meanwhile, I kept building my evidence file and waiting for the right moment to strike. Thursday evening, everything came to a head in a way I couldn't have planned better if I'd tried. Jessica was in the shower when her phone lit up with an incoming call from Nathan R. Without thinking too hard about the consequences, I answered it. "Hello?" There was silence on the other end. Then a confused male voice said, "Who is this?" "This is Derek," I replied calmly. "Derek? I think I have the wrong number." "Wait, is this Nathan?" I asked, pretending to be helpful rather than suspicious. Another pause. "Yeah, this is Nathan. Jessica's mentioned you." "She's mentioned you too, actually. She's in the shower right now. Can I take a message?" "No, that's okay. I'll call back later." "Actually, Nathan, can I ask you something? Jessica mentioned you've been giving her some legal advice about pregnancy stuff. That's really nice of you to help out." I could practically hear his panic through the phone. "Legal advice?" "Yeah, about paternity paperwork and birth certificates. She said you have a lawyer friend who's been helping you guys figure out the documentation process. I think there's been some confusion. I haven't been giving Jessica legal advice about anything." "Oh, that's weird. She specifically mentioned emails about paternity issues and timing concerns." The line went dead. I sat there holding Jessica's phone, grinning like an idiot. Nathan was about to have a very uncomfortable conversation with Jessica about why her supposed baby daddy was asking questions about their legal consultations. More importantly, Nathan was about to realize that I knew way more than I was supposed to know. 10 minutes later, Jessica came out of the bathroom to find me sitting calmly on the couch watching TV. "Any calls while I was in the shower?" she asked casually. "Yeah, actually, Nathan called for you." She froze completely. "Nathan?" "Yeah, strange guy. When I mentioned you told me about his legal advice on pregnancy paperwork, he seemed really confused. Said he hadn't been giving you any legal advice at all." Jessica's face went through about 5 different expressions in 3 seconds. Confusion, panic, calculation, anger, and finally resignation. "Oh, he probably just misunderstood what you were asking about." "Maybe," I said, standing up and walking to my laptop. "Or maybe there's something you haven't been telling me about your relationship with Nathan." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to figure out how much I actually knew versus how much I was guessing. "Derek, I think we need to talk." "Yeah," I said, opening my evidence folder and turning the screen toward her. "I think we do. I think we need to talk about a lot of things." Jessica looked at my laptop screen for maybe 45 seconds, scanning through the emails, timeline documents, and screenshots I'd assembled. I watched her whole demeanor change as she realized the scope of what I'd discovered. The panic, the defensive energy, the scrambling for explanations, all of it just drained away and was replaced by something cold and calculating. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. "Does it matter?" "I suppose not." She sat down across from me, suddenly very calm. "What do you want?" The question caught me off guard. I'd expected tears, desperate denials, frantic attempts to explain everything away. Instead, she was treating this like a business negotiation. What do I want? You clearly have evidence of an affair. You know the baby might not be yours. You've been building some kind of case against me for weeks. So what's your endgame here? Money? Public humiliation? Revenge? I stared at her, amazed by how quickly she'd shifted into damage control mode. I want the truth. All of it. Fine, she leaned back in her chair. Nathan and I have been seeing each other for about 5 months. The baby is probably his, but there's a small chance it could be yours. I was planning to let you believe you were the father until I could figure out whether Nathan was willing to leave his wife. And if he wasn't, then I'd stay with you and raise Nathan's baby. You'd never know the difference. The casual way she said it, like she was discussing dinner plans, made my stomach turn. What if Nathan was willing to leave his wife? I asked. Then I'd tell you the truth eventually and move in with him. What about the 18 years of child support I'd be paying for a kid that wasn't mine? That would be unfortunate. Unfortunate. Like accidentally buying the wrong brand of cereal at the grocery store. And you don't see anything wrong with this plan? She shrugged. People make choices based on their circumstances. My circumstances changed when I realized Nathan was available. Nathan is married. Marriages end all the time. So you were planning to destroy his marriage, trick me into raising another man's child, and you think that's just practical decision-making? I think that's survival, Derek. You're a nice guy, but you're not going anywhere in life. You do quality assurance for a tech company. Nathan is a successful real estate agent with a house in the suburbs and real earning potential. If I'm going to have a baby, I want that baby to have the best possible future. The complete lack of remorse was absolutely staggering. She'd planned to ruin multiple lives for her own convenience, and she was talking about it like it was a reasonable career move. What about Victoria, Nathan's wife? What about her? What about her? She doesn't deserve to know her husband is cheating? That's between Nathan and Victoria. I don't owe her anything. You don't owe me anything either, apparently. I've been a good girlfriend to you, Derek. I've lived here, shared expenses, been supportive of your work. This isn't personal. This isn't personal? You were planning to trick me into raising another man's child for the next 18 years. And you would have been happy. You would have had a family, a purpose, something to care about beyond your boring job and your boring life. In a lot of ways, I was doing you a favor. That's when I realized I wasn't dealing with someone who had made a mistake or gotten in over her head. I was dealing with someone who genuinely believed that other people existed to serve her needs, and that any manipulation required to achieve her goals was completely justified. Well, I said, closing my laptop, I guess it's a good thing I found out when I did. So what happens now? Now you move out. And that's it? You move out, I move on. You deal with your situation however you want to deal with it. She looked surprised. That's it? What did you expect? I don't know. Threats, demands, dramatic confrontations. You've been building this whole investigation for weeks. I wanted to understand what I was dealing with. Now I do. She stood up. I can be out by the weekend. That works? Derek? Yeah? For what it's worth, you're not a bad guy. You're just not the right guy for me. After she went to bed that night, I sat in my living room thinking about that conversation. Jessica had been completely honest about her motives and methods, and she'd shown zero remorse for any of it. She'd treated our entire relationship like a temporary convenience while she positioned herself for something better. But here's the thing. I'd lied to her just as smoothly as she'd been lying to me. I wasn't done with Jessica. Not even close. See, what Jessica didn't know was that my evidence file wasn't just for my own peace of mind. It was for Victoria Rodriguez, who had been doing her own investigation since our phone call and was about to discover some very interesting things about her husband's recent activities. It was also for Jessica's employer, who had strict policies about using company resources for personal business. Policies that Jessica had been systematically violating while coordinating her affair during work hours using company email and equipment. And it was for Nathan's employer, where extramarital affairs with clients or partners could be grounds for termination in the real estate industry, especially when those affairs involved deception and manipulation that could reflect poorly on the company's reputation. Most importantly, it was for the legal system, where attempted paternity fraud is actually a crime in some circumstances, especially when there's evidence of premeditation and intent to defraud someone out of substantial financial support over many years. Jessica thought she was getting away with nothing more than inconvenience and embarrassment. She had absolutely no idea what was coming her way. Jessica moved out that Saturday, taking only the stuff she'd brought when she moved in 9 months earlier. She was polite, efficient, and completely unemotional about the whole process, like she was switching apartments instead of ending a 2-year relationship where she'd planned to commit massive fraud. The weird part was how normal she acted right up until the very end. She made coffee in the morning, said goodbye like she was going to work instead of moving out permanently. She even asked if I wanted her to pick up groceries later before catching herself. Sorry, she said, habit. No problem. As she was loading the last box into her car, she turned back to me. You know, if circumstances were different, this could have worked out. If circumstances were different, you wouldn't have tried to trick me into raising another man's baby. Fair point. She actually smiled. Take care of yourself, Derek. And then she drove away. I spent the weekend cleaning the apartment and thinking about what came next. Part of me wondered if I should just let it go. Jessica was out of my life. I had dodged a massive bullet, and everyone could theoretically move on with their lives. But I kept coming back to what she'd said about doing me a favor. The complete absence of remorse or acknowledgement that what she'd done was fundamentally wrong. The casual way she'd talked about destroying lives for her own convenience, like other people's feelings and futures, were just variables in her personal equation. Monday morning, I made the first call. Hi, Victoria, this is Chris. We spoke last week about your husband. I remember. I asked you not to call me again? I understand, and I apologize for bothering you. But I have some additional information that I think you need to see. What kind of information? Documentation, photos, email correspondence, proof of what I was telling you. Silence for about 15 seconds. Can you email it to me? I'd rather meet in person. This is the kind of thing that's better discussed face to face. I don't know you. I'm not meeting with a stranger. Then bring someone with you. Meet me at a coffee shop somewhere public. I just think you deserve to see this before you make any decisions about your marriage. Another pause. There's a Starbucks on Biscayne Boulevard downtown, Wednesday at noon. I'll be there. Tuesday at noon, I walked into that Starbucks carrying a folder with copies of everything I'd gathered over the past few weeks. Victoria was already there, sitting with another woman who I assumed was there for moral support. I introduced myself and sat down across from them. Before we start, Victoria said, I need to know who you really are and how you got this information. I'd been expecting this question and had prepared an answer that was technically true but strategically incomplete. My name is actually Derek, not Chris. I apologize for the fake name, but I needed to be careful about how I approached this. The woman your husband has been having an affair with is my ex-girlfriend. I discovered their relationship while we were still together. So this is revenge? Partially, yes. But it's also about making sure you have accurate information about what's been happening in your marriage. I opened the folder and started laying out documents methodically. Email printouts, timeline reconstructions, screenshots of text messages, photos of Jessica and Nathan together that I'd obtained from her social media accounts. Everything organized chronologically so the story would be clear. Victoria looked through everything with careful attention, her face getting paler with each page she reviewed. The evidence was comprehensive and damning. How long? She asked finally. Based on what I could document, about 5 months, but possibly longer. And she's pregnant? Yes, she told me it was mine, but the timing doesn't work out. According to her doctor, conception would have happened during a period when your husband was available and I wasn't. Victoria's friend put her hand on her shoulder. Victoria, honey, are you okay? No, Victoria said quietly. I'm not okay. She looked up at me. What do you want from me? Nothing. I wanted you to know what was happening so you could make informed decisions about your life. And what about your ex-girlfriend? Jessica made her choices. Now she gets to live with the consequences. Victoria gathered up all the documents and put them back in the folder. Can I keep these? That's why I brought them. She stood up, then looked back at me. Thank you, I know this was probably difficult for you too. Yeah, it was. After they left, I sat in that Starbucks for another hour, drinking coffee and thinking about what I'd just set in motion. Victoria seemed like a decent person who'd been working hard to build a life with someone who was actively betraying her. She deserved better than what Nathan had been putting her through. Over the next few weeks, I watched the dominoes fall one by one, exactly as I'd hoped they would. First, Victoria confronted Nathan. According to her later Facebook posts, he initially tried to deny everything, then minimized it as a mistake, then finally admitted to the full scope of the affair when she presented him with the evidence I'd provided. She filed for divorce within a week. Second, Nathan's employer got an anonymous tip about his unprofessional conduct with clients and associates. I may have mentioned in my tip that real estate agents who engage in extramarital affairs pose a risk to client trust and company reputation. He didn't get fired, but he did get formally reprimanded and lost his chance at a promotion he'd been working toward. Third, Jessica's employer received documentation showing that she'd been using company email and work time to coordinate personal matters, specifically an extramarital affair. She got written up for misuse of company resources and had her remote work privileges revoked. But the real consequences were more personal than professional. Nathan completely cut contact with Jessica once his marriage imploded. Turns out planning a family with your mistress is a lot less appealing when it costs you your house, half your assets, and your reputation in the community. Jessica went from thinking she was about to upgrade to a better life with a successful real estate agent to finding herself pregnant, single, and dealing with the fallout from a very public affair. She tried calling me a few times in those first weeks after everything came out. I didn't answer, but she left voicemails that started apologetic and got increasingly desperate as her situation became more dire. "Derek, I know you're angry, but we need to talk. I made mistakes, but I never meant for things to get this complicated. Derek, please call me back. I think we could work through this if we just talked honestly about everything. Derek, I'm pregnant and alone and I don't know what to do. I know I hurt you, but I need help figuring out my next steps." I deleted all of them without responding. Jessica had made her choices with full knowledge of the potential consequences. She just thought she was smarter than everyone else and that she'd never get caught. About 3 months after Jessica moved out, I ran into her at a grocery store. She looked tired, stressed, and was obviously showing her pregnancy now. She saw me in the checkout line and came over. "Derek, hi, how have you been?" "I've been fine, Jessica. How are you doing?" It's been challenging. The baby's due in November." I remember. "I know things ended badly between us, but I was wondering if we could talk sometime. Maybe grab coffee and clear the air?" I looked at her for a moment. She seemed genuinely vulnerable for the first time since I'd known her, but I also remembered how easily she'd lied to my face for months. How casually she'd planned to destroy multiple lives for her own benefit. "I don't think that's a good idea, Jessica." "Derek, please, I know I made mistakes, but—" "You didn't make mistakes. You made choices. Very deliberate, calculated choices. And now you're dealing with the consequences of those choices. I was trying to do what was best for everyone." "No, you were trying to do what was best for you. Everyone else was just collateral damage." She started to tear up. "I'm scared, Derek. I don't know how I'm going to handle this alone." For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "You should have thought about that before you decided to blow up your life for someone who didn't want you enough to leave his wife." I paid for my groceries and left her standing there. That was the last time I saw Jessica. But it wasn't the end of the story. About 6 months later, I got a friend request on Facebook from Victoria Rodriguez, along with a message. "Hi, Derek. I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I wanted to thank you for what you did. It was the hardest thing I've ever been through, but you were right. I deserve to know. I'm doing much better now. Got the promotion I was working for, and I'm in a relationship with someone who actually values honesty. I hope you're doing well too." I accepted the friend request and wrote back. "I'm glad things worked out for you, Victoria. You deserved better than what Nathan was putting you through. Thanks for letting me know you're okay." She responded a few hours later. "Can I ask what happened with your ex? I know it's probably not my business, but I've wondered." She had the baby in November, a boy according to mutual friends. She's raising him alone. Nathan never acknowledged paternity, and from what I hear, she's struggling financially. "Do you ever feel bad about how it all turned out?" I thought about that question for a long time before answering. I feel bad that an innocent kid is going to grow up without a father and with limited resources. But I don't feel bad about exposing the truth. Jessica made her choices knowing the potential consequences. She just thought she was smarter than everyone else and that she'd never get caught. Fair enough. Well, thanks again, Derek, for having the courage to do the right thing, even when it was difficult. That conversation stuck with me for weeks because it made me think about the bigger picture of what had happened. Yes, I'd gotten my revenge on Jessica, and yes, she'd faced consequences for her actions. But there was also an innocent child who was going to pay the price for his mother's decisions. And Nathan, who had escaped most of the real consequences, while Jessica bore the brunt of everything. Don't get me wrong. I don't regret exposing the affair or making sure Victoria knew what was happening. But the whole situation left me thinking about how people's selfish choices create ripple effects that hurt innocent people for years to come. Jessica wanted to play games with people's lives. She found out that some games have permanent consequences. As for me, I learned some valuable lessons about trust, about red flags, and about the importance of paying attention when your gut tells you something's wrong. I'm in a relationship now with someone who actually believes in honesty and communication. Someone who doesn't see other people as chess pieces to be moved around for personal advantage. And every time I feel grateful for that, I remember Jessica sitting in my living room, explaining how she was doing me a favor by planning to trick me into raising another man's child. Some people really do believe that the world exists to serve their needs, and they'll justify any manipulation required to get what they want. The scary part isn't that people like Jessica exist. It's how good they are at seeming normal until you scratch beneath the surface and discover what they're really capable of. So that's my story about how I discovered my girlfriend was pregnant with another man's baby and planning to let me raise it while she continued trying to win back her affair partner, and how I made sure everyone involved knew exactly what kind of person they were dealing with. Jessica got to learn that actions have consequences. Victoria got to learn the truth about her marriage. Nathan got to learn that affairs aren't just harmless fun. And I got to learn that sometimes the best revenge is simply making sure the truth comes to light because some people's own actions are punishment enough. The whole experience taught me that when someone shows you who they really are, you should believe them the first time. Jessica had shown me through her deception that she was capable of extraordinary manipulation and callousness. She was willing to destroy multiple lives for her own convenience and felt completely justified in doing so. I'm grateful that I discovered the truth when I did, rather than years down the line when I would have been emotionally and financially invested in a child that wasn't mine. I'm grateful that Victoria found out about Nathan's betrayal before wasting more years of her life on someone who didn't value her. And I'm grateful that my quality assurance skills translated so well to real-life investigation, because without that methodical approach, I might never have uncovered the full scope of what Jessica was planning. The most chilling part of the whole experience was Jessica's complete lack of remorse. Even when confronted with undeniable evidence of her deception, she treated it like a business decision that hadn't worked out. There was no acknowledgement that she'd tried to commit what amounted to fraud. No recognition that she'd planned to destroy multiple families for her own benefit. That's when I realized I wasn't dealing with someone who had made a mistake or gotten in over her head. I was dealing with someone who fundamentally saw other people as resources to be exploited for her own advancement. And people like that don't stop until they face real consequences for their actions. Looking back on everything that happened, I think the most important lesson I learned was about trusting your instincts. When something feels off in a relationship, there's usually a reason for that feeling. Those little inconsistencies, the behavioral changes, the secretive phone calls, they all add up to a pattern that your subconscious recognizes before your rational mind catches up. If I hadn't applied my professional investigative skills to my personal life, I might have spent the next 18 years raising Nathan's child while Jessica continued to manipulate the situation to her advantage. The financial cost alone would have been staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in child support, education costs, healthcare, and general expenses for a child that wasn't even mine. But beyond the financial implications, think about the emotional cost. I would have formed a bond with that child, loved him as my own son, built my entire identity around being his father. And Jessica would have let me do that while knowing the truth the entire time. The level of cruelty required to maintain that kind of deception for years is almost incomprehensible. The whole experience also made me realize how many people are living lies without even knowing it. How many men are unknowingly raising children that aren't biologically theirs? How many women like Victoria are working to build futures with partners who are actively betraying them? The web of deception that some people create can be incredibly elaborate and long-lasting. Jessica's plan wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision made in a moment of panic. This was a carefully calculated strategy that she'd been developing and implementing for months. She'd thought through the legal implications, the financial benefits, the timeline management. Everything except the possibility that someone might actually investigate her story. What strikes me most about the whole situation is how normal Jessica seemed throughout our relationship. She wasn't obviously manipulative or cruel in her day-to-day behavior. She was charming, supportive, and loving in many ways. But underneath that facade was someone capable of extraordinary deception and callousness when it served her purposes. I think that's what makes people like Jessica so dangerous. They're excellent at presenting themselves as trustworthy and caring, while simultaneously planning to exploit that trust for their own benefit. They understand how to say the right things, how to behave in ways that inspire confidence and affection, all while calculating how to use those emotions against you. In the end, Jessica got exactly what she deserved. She gambled everything on a plan that required multiple people to remain ignorant of her deception, and she lost. Nathan abandoned her the moment his comfortable life was threatened. She lost her job benefits and remote work privileges. She ended up as a single mother with limited resources and a damaged reputation. But more than that, she lost any chance of building genuine relationships based on trust and honesty. Once word got around about what she'd tried to do, her dating prospects became essentially non-existent. Who wants to be in a relationship with someone capable of that level of manipulation and fraud? Sometimes the best revenge really is just letting people face the natural consequences of their own actions. Jessica wanted to play elaborate games with people's lives and emotions. She discovered that when those games backfire, the consequences can be permanent and life-altering. As for me, I'm grateful for the experience in a weird way. It taught me what real deception looks like, how to recognize red flags I might have missed before, and how important it is to trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Most importantly, it made me appreciate genuine honesty and transparency in relationships even more than I did before. The woman I'm with now is everything Jessica pretended to be: honest, straightforward, and genuinely caring about other people's well-being. And because I went through the experience with Jessica, I never take those qualities for granted.